Willkommen zurück. A map for the present. Among the newly erased interest for postmodernism among artists, Henrike Naumann takes a special position because she not only refeatures, resamples furniture that stems from postmodernism, but she also looks at the social conditions of postmodernism and how they shaped and influenced the situations we are in today. I want to name among her exhibitions, Sculpture Center last year, fantastic, like therapeutic installation of the United States of America, and her recent contribution to the Kiev Biennial. Henrike Naumann, please, the floor is yours.
What comes after postmodernism? I see this lecture as a response to the exhibition text in der zweiten Postmoderne for the exhibition catalog of Bundeskunsthalle. Interpreting Russia as a postmodern dictatorship assaulting Ukraine in a postmodern war is something that I think needs more context. I understand the fascination for trying to analyze the evil perpetrator, but it comes at the cost of ignoring the perspectives of the victims violently affected by this. While Putin gets almost 3,000 characters in the text, Ukrainians are mentioned only once, as quote-unquote Nazis. So a text that set out to analyze a postmodern dictatorship fell victim to its mechanisms and traps and enforced its narrative. The label postmodernism can obscure the view on the consequences it has. So I want to respond and ask a question: what comes after postmodernism? Chapter 1, death. This is the M2 Mazda building in Tokyo, a staple in every show on postmodernism. It seems to be built with a DIY kit on how to construct a postmodern building. Architect Kengo Kuma, who later became known for a traditional Japanese aesthetic of wood and natural materials, would have loved for people to forget about this early work of his. But architecture has the tendency to just stick around. It was finished in 1991, at a moment when the classic postmodern era was coming to a close. At the same time, postmodernism was already having a renaissance in stores all throughout East Germany and the former Eastern Bloc, where the old designs could find new customers wanting to refurnish their homes in a Western or Euro-Remont style. The M2 was built as a gigantic showroom for Mazda cars. It hosted fairs and sale events. But the crash of the Japanese 1980s bubble economy forced the company to close in 1995. So I was curious, what is happening inside this gigantic monument to postmodernism today? How did Japanese society, where many things needed to be restructured following the economic crash, re-envision this extraordinary building? So in 2018, I traveled to the outskirts of Tokyo to visit this temple of postmodernism. But what I saw inside exceeded my wildest expectations. The building had been taken over by a company called Memolith, founded in 1981. The company's line of business included preparing the dead for burial, conducting funerals, and cremating the dead. So in the halls that in the early 90s had cars on display, now presented flower arrangements, altars, and coffins. Deeply confused by the atmosphere and the layers of history in the space, I wandered through this gigantic building with my analog camera, trying to capture something of the afterlife of Japanese postmodernism. I could not believe it, but at the same time, it made a lot of sense. How after the crash, the consumer temple was turned into a temple for mourning. So in my research, I decided to contrast these different historical layers by combining archival footage from young Japanese women, so-called car girls, posing next to the cars, with photos I took of the mourning spaces. I put their clothing in relation to the curtains and fabrics in the rooms. It spoke about the fact that we know nothing about them and about their lives, only that in one point in their life they had the job of presenting these cars. And next to them a photo of an empty space, which speaks about loss and a person not being there anymore. My research in Tokyo focused on the fashion connection between Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Japanese designers of the 1980s. During the Congolese Wars in the 1990s, groups of sapeurs formed that dressed primarily in clothing by Issey Miyake, Yohji Yamamoto, and Comme des Garçons. I was interested in these fashion designs that in the 1980s were labeled post-atomic fashion. Through interviews and research, I wanted to explore what role the memory of war and trauma played and why these designs were so hot during the Congolese wars. Japan's role in the Second World War as one of the Axis powers with Italy and Germany and their aggressive colonial expansion prompted attacks by the Allied forces. In Tokyo and Hiroshima, I researched the World War II traumas of designers Yohji Yamamoto and Issey Miyake. As a child, Miyake had survived the dropping of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. Yamamoto said in an interview with Wim Wenders in 1989 that because his father never returned from the war, for him the war never ended. And so for him, there is no post-war era. Looking at post-war Japan, especially in the height of the bubble economy of the 1980s before the crash, I started collecting these 1980s clocks that everyone seemed to have gotten in those days as presents from their employers for their hard works. When the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, all clocks stopped at that very moment, at 8:15. I stopped my clocks at the exact same time, speaking about the trauma of war, still present in the prosperous post-war society. What comes after postmodernism? Chapter 2, War. For my following chapter on Izolacja, I'm drawing intensely on the research of Ukrainian scholar Katarina Yakovlenko, the conversations we had, and in particular her essay From Postmodern Art to Stalinism, Donetsk Culture Reimagined from 2023. For further reading, I suggest the archive of the Izolacja platform online and the writings by journalist and former prisoner of Izolacja, Stanislav Aseyev, The Torture Camp on Paradise Street, and In Isolations, Dispatches from Occupied Donbass. Last month, I participated in the 2023 Kiev Biennial in Ukraine. Traveling to Ukraine to produce a work on site, I decided to collaborate particularly with male artists who cannot leave the country anymore. My work reflected on the fact that now every male artist is a potential future soldier. The conversations I had in Ukraine gave me a deeper understanding of the situation our colleagues face there, but also of the blind spots we have in regards to the role of art in this war. From a curator from Donetsk in eastern Ukraine, I heard about the art center Izolatia. Izolatia is a non-governmental platform for cultural initiatives, founded in 2010 on the site of a former insulation factory in Donetsk. It became an important art center in the region, looking back at Soviet history, as well as thinking about future concepts for the region. They organized many projects and exhibitions with Ukrainian and international artists that realized large site-specific works in the industrial spaces. In June 2014, the Izolatia complex was seized by the Russian Federation and converted into an illegal prison and military base. Buildings used for cultural events and art projects are now places of illegal imprisonment, torture, and execution by firing squads. According to the testimony of former prisoners, the hostages are kept in inhumane conditions, made to do forced labor, and undergo moral and physical abuse. When I heard about Izolatia, I was beyond shocked. As an artist and someone working in art institutions since over 10 years, it haunted me in a personal way. But what disturbed me tremendously is that I had never heard about Izolatia. One curator from Donetsk described it like this: in 2014, we lost the information war. It made me think of a lot of conversations I keep having in Germany with people arguing along FSB disinformation talking points when speaking about Ukraine, oligarchs, and Nazis. On the photo, you see a torture chamber in Izolatia with electric shock devices. The photos we see here were released anonymously in 2019 through the Telegram channel of Donetski Traktorist and were confirmed by former prisoners. Who the tractor driver is remains unclear, though his name is a dig at Russian propaganda, harkening back at Putin's claim in 2015 that those fighting in Donbass are yesterday's miners and yesterday's tractor drivers. This map shows the use of the former art center as a prison after the seizure. This is an excerpt from the United Nations Human Rights Report, Arbitrary Detention, Torture and Ill Treatment in the Context of Armed Conflict in Eastern Ukraine, 2014 to 2021, detailing forms of torture conducted in Izolatia. What role does art play in all of this? I want to show you this video from 2014, an excerpt from an interview with self-proclaimed head of the special committee, Leonid Baranov, where he speaks about the art that was shown in the art center before the occupation.
Учитывая, какое это искусство, его нельзя было не знать, потому как я считаю вот эти вещи, которые здесь у нас происходят, она намного подобные вещи. Для меня это не искусство, искусством являться не может. Вот. Это больные люди снимают, пока больные люди. То есть это искусство никогда. Хотите вот этой Народной Республики, наркоманы и подобное искусство будет разрушено. Что это не искусство, это порнография. Поэтому мы никак не могли поступить по-другому, мне хочется еще. Кроме как выгнать этих больных родных людей, которые здесь находились на территории завода. Отсюда тоже. Сюда были миллионы грамм. То есть здесь деньги, да, хорошо. говорили, почему деньги, все, кто только можно, кто только нельзя, которые пошли недавно, не имеют почему в прошлом семестре. Это люди, ненавидящие все славянское, все русское. Вот, поэтому сам вот, поэтому мы говорим никак на это. Смотрите, как здесь это мимо. То есть вот эти ребята здесь забивали голову молодых у нас, которая должна расти, жениться, заводить детей и увеличивать население прав на нашей республике. Само самостоятельно нами были приняты меры, и мы как информационное искусство уехало на все, что здесь было похоже на искусство, мы разрешили регистры, завышенные картинки, пейзажи, все остальное. Вот. Мы их разрешили. Что касается порнографии, и
что там за сейчас я называю информационное разрушение?
я же вам не показываю. Я говорю, не только там есть рядом такие же, такие вообще, совершенно можно это посмотреть. Я за это не вот. Все подобное, непонятно. И я думаю, что в республике мы сможем пройти из этого.
А ты можешь рассказать, у меня там свет не стоит?
Это отдельно по комментарии к этому делу. А я читать такого вообще никогда почему.
Нет, я телефон даю.
Уже мне туда не интересно.
He states that the art shown here promotes pornography and drug abuse and has a bad influence on young people who should get married, have children, and by doing so, multiply exponentially the population of the Republic. The books he is presenting as examples of this decay are art books by Boris Mikhailov, the ultra-famous Ukrainian photographer from Kharkiv, who made a name for himself, showing extreme realities of post-Soviet society. Further, he shows the book Futuring by queer German artist duo Eva and Adele. And No Fashion Please, a book about photography and gender. One former prisoner stated that while he was in the secret prison and had no idea where he had been brought, after finding an art catalogue in one of the cells, he realized where he was. The work Homo Bulla by Ukrainian artist Maria Kulikovska from 2012 was one of the site-specific works that stayed in Izolatia after the seizure. The work consists of human-sized casts of her own naked body, recreated in soap. It later emerged that Russian soldiers were using the soap sculptures as training targets in the shooting camp. The artist reacted to this brutal use of her work and of her body by participating in the filming of the movie Zabuti, The Forgotten Ones, by Daria Onyshchenko in the role of a journalist from a propaganda channel, shooting at her own work. The work Make Up by Cameroonian artist Pascal Martin Taillou from 2012 reflected on the role that women played in the post-war development of Donetsk and its industrial reconstruction. He transformed the tip of one of the factory pipes into a gigantic red lipstick. The work was one of the site-specific works that was destroyed by the occupying forces. While the lipstick sculpture evokes associations with different iconic works of postmodernism, the mobile video of the blow-up makes me think of the destruction of the Prit Ego housing complex in St. Louis in 1972, marking the day modern architecture died and the birth of postmodernism. With these remarks, I want to highlight what is at stake for Ukrainian artists and Ukrainian people in this war. That Russian occupation of Ukraine doesn't mean that a garage center for contemporary art might open in Kiev. Russian occupation of Ukraine means re-education, distraction, and banning of artworks, erasure of history and people, happening in real time as we speak. And that this is the underlying threat Ukrainian artists face with every German well-meaning, peace-driven exhibition trying to normalize Russian and Ukrainian artists exhibiting side by side in the midst of this brutal war. In the official art of Stalin's time, the display of women's hard work was marginal. One of the few exceptions is the painting The Donbass by Alexander Deneka from 1947, held in the State Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. The painting depicts the workers in an idealized way, not exhausted by hard labor, but physically robust and enthusiastic. This painting shows an image of the Donetsk region as, in Katarina Yakovlenko's words, the utopian idea of a unique and self-sufficient region with inexhaustible natural resources and the daily heroic work of miners and metallurgists that formed the basis of the Soviet myth of an urban paradise created by the hand of the working people. After the occupation of eastern Ukraine and the destruction and erasure of all postmodern and contemporary international art, new exhibitions of art took place in the self-proclaimed Donetsk People Republic, DPR, that can be seen in the socialist realist image tradition of Stalinism. This contemporary painting by then 27-year-old St. Petersburg artist Alexander Novoselov was shown in an exhibition in Donetsk in 2017. Next to endless paintings about the Great Patriotic War and soldatic life, paintings in the show like this could be what Leonid Baranov might have imagined when speaking about art influencing young people to procreate and so multiply exponentially the population of the DPR. But art also transformed in the public sphere. From 2014 on, posters like this started to appear in Donbass. This one features a highly recognizable 1941 Soviet wartime poster, Motherland, by Irakli Toitse, with an additional slogan on the left, "Join the People's Militia of Donbass." 2017 marked the 100-year anniversary of the 1917 revolution. On the billboards in the city of Donetsk appeared agitation posters, which called for consolidating military forces and cementing victory in the war against Ukraine. The right side of the billboard reproduced a well-known 1942 poster by the Kukriniksi Collective. It placed soldiers of World War II against a background portraying Russian military grades, from medieval Rus knights to Civil War icon Vasil Shapayev. The DPR propagandists attempted to construct their identity not on a regional, but on a heroic historical base, referencing Stalin wartime propaganda directed at the Soviet Union in general. By this, their aim was to build a connection to the familiar visual representation of righteous violence, which also implied an uncritical attitude towards Stalinism and the identification of the pro-Western enemy with the Nazis. What comes after postmodernism? Chapter 3, Fascism. After looking at what came after postmodernism in Japan and Ukraine, I want to look at Germany. In particular, the place I know best, the rural area around Zwickau, where I grew up. Postmodern design and architecture left a strong visual mark in the area, mostly because it was the aesthetic style that was widely used after the end of socialism. But sometimes also postmodern thought and humor left traces in the region. This is the Arno-Schmidt-Straße in Wildenfels, built in the 1990s in an industrial area outside of Zwickau. It borders the Gewerbestraße, and its only purpose is to lead people from the Autobahn to McDonald's. Named after legendary West German writer Arno Schmidt, who can be seen as the eccentric bridge between modernist and postmodern writing in Germany, the naming of this banal street leading to a fast food drive-in seems to me like a conceptual intervention by a West German low-level city planner, excited about his inside joke. When I was still studying and would visit my family in Zwickau, I would always have a Mitfahrgelegenheit pick-up from this McDonald's. While studying, I also discovered postmodernism. A lot of things started to make sense to me. Where all the aesthetics and references came from that reached me in the 1990s in East Germany as the copy of the copy of the copy. I dedicated my artistic work in the next decade to the legacy of postmodern design in Germany, how it speaks about German unification, what it means to become part of the West, and what political and social processes happened in the 1990s in between these furniture pieces. So what comes after postmodernism? In 2017, the devastating federal election in Germany saw the AfD rise to become third strongest party and manifested the redivision of Germany on election result maps. The Freiwillige Feuerwehr, Voluntary Firefighter Brigade, in my mother's hometown, commissioned a wall mural for their fire department. In this very small village, this painting is the only piece that can be considered public art. The photo shows the view from her kitchen table, from which she and all her guests have to constantly look at the piece. The painting is beyond what anyone working in the art or culture would imagine as a work of public art in Germany today. It depicts the firefighter as a Nazi-era hero with Stahlhelm, rescuing a sexualized, half-naked blonde woman from a burning house. Below it says, Anno 1940, leaving no doubt as to which era the fire department is proudly referencing. Looking at the painting in search of art history references, which for me is a strategy to work with deeply disturbing material, I see Jeff Koons' wife, Ilona Cicciolina Stala, and their joint work Made in Heaven from 1990, as well as depictions of Nazi soldiers as heroic fighters from 1940s German propaganda posters. But what does this painting tell me about what comes after postmodernism? After the fall of the wall and the end of socialism in East Germany, West and East Germans were worried that socialist sentiment and power might return. So many political, economic, and cultural decisions in the 1990s were based on this German version of a post-socialist Red Scare belief and resulted in an exchange of East German officials with West Germans, privatization of East German people-owned companies into West German private companies, and replacement of East German art history with Western art canons. Professorships of artists from the GDR were terminated, making space for professors from the West German 80s art scene to start over in Leipzig, Dresden, and Halle. Calls from a younger generation of artists and scholars socialized or interested in East German art history are only in recent years being heard, and started a variety of projects on digging remnants of this forgotten art history. But all these efforts to prevent a fascination for socialism from returning to East Germany were probably unnecessary. Because in times of crisis and cultural political vacuum, what comes back is what has been underlying German society for much longer, in a more fundamental way, in East and in West Germany alike. So what comes after postmodernism? It's the things that have been there before. It's the things that have been there always. The challenge is that postmodernism might obscure our view. And while we sit in our colorful chairs, fascinated with the irony of the world, and try to end wars with a social media post, it might already be too late. Thank you.